Happy Monday evening, everyone. Just wanted to touch base on some of the things that soldiers need now and how we can continue to help. I actually wanted to frame this conversation slightly differently and just have a discussion about what's missing, or sorry, what happened on October 7th and what that can inform us in terms of what happened or what's going on now. So bear with me one second here. Let's just take a listen here.
אתם כצבא צריכים להתעקש עליו שיהיה ראשון. ראשון! לא אחרון, ראשון! זה לא הגיוני, די! חלה, כמה אני יכול להיות יותר מפורק עם ההורים שלי? כמה?
למה הוא נלחם עליו בכנסת ולא אתם? איפה אתם?
אתם כצבא צריכים לדרוש את שלי שיהיה ראשון ברשימה הזאת. ראשון! לא אחרון, ראשון!
לפגישה הזאת משפחות חיילים חטופים ומשפחות הלוחמים שנפלו ב7 באוקטובר חיכו זמן רב.
נמצאים כאן הבלונאים, נמצאים כאן אנשי חטיבת גולני, נמצאים כאן חטיבה 7 שבגופם, ליטרלי בגופם, נהרגו ונלחמו עם הכדור האחרון.
זאת הפעם הראשונה שנפגשות עם בכירי צה"ל, עם ראש אכ"א, אלוף דדו בר קליפה, עם אלופי המשנה שמתחקרים את קרבות נחל עוז, ועם המפקדים שפיקדו על יקיריהן, בראשם מפקד פיקוד דרום, האלוף ירון פינקלמן. בהקלטות שנשמע מיד מפורסמות באישור המשפחות שקולה נשמע. המשפחות השמיעו את זעקת יקיריהן, כמו קרוביו של החטוף מתן אנגרסט, שנחטף פצוע מהטנק בנחל עוז ועדיין שבוי בעזה.
אני ענת, אמא של מתן אנגרסט, חבל שאתה לא מכיר אותי עוד. לא שמעתי אף גורם צבאי שנלחם על זה שלא יאפשרו להשאיר את החטופים שלנו לחוק. אתה המפקד הראשי של הבן שלי, והצבא לא נלחם עליו.
צורף לי המפגש איתכם, מחבק כל אחד ואחת מכם באופן אישי.
הוא התחיל עם אדם גולדין. לפני 10 שנים הוא היה מפקד צוק אז עכשיו הוא השאיר אותו שם. למה שהוא יחזיר את הבנים עכשיו?
אני רוצה להבין מה עשית עד היום ומה אתה מתכוון לעשות אחרי הפגישה הזאת כדי שמתן, איתי ודניאל יחזרו כולם ביחד. די מה הם לא סוגים מהם.
שימה ראשונה, בדיונים שלנו, הכי חשובה, כי הכי חשובה. אתם לא מכירים אותם? אני לא מכיר אותם, אני יודע היטב מי אתה.
גם משפחתו של החייל החטוף איתי חן הגיעה והטיחה ביקורת קשה במפקדים הבכירים.
הבן שלי עדיין חייל חטוף כבר מעל 510 ימים, ואני מאוד מקווה שהדבר הראשון שאתה קם בבוקר וחושב עליו זה תחזיר לי את הבן ועוד 59 חטופים. אני ציפיתי שיהיה פה תחקיר, שישבו פה אנשי אמ"ן, זה שלקח את האחריות זה נחמד. מח"א לא קיבל טלפון. אתה יכול להסביר לי בבקשה למה מח"א לא היה חלק מהדיון הזה?
אם אתם תרצו לראות תחקיר מודיעיני, לא עכשיו, אנחנו נעריך בזה, נציג לכם את העיקרים שלו. אני מזכיר לכם שאני מאז 7 באוקטובר מפקד על מלחמה ללא הפסקה.
חיילי גולני עיגבו אותו ועשו שם את כל מה שהם יכולים. נלחמו במיגוניות, נלחמו בש"ג, נלחמו בתוך החמ"ל נחל עוז שעות ארוכות.
שוב ושוב איציק, אביו של סמל ראשון ישי פיטוסי זיכרונו לברכה, שנלחם במחבלים רבים, הציל חיים ונפל ב7 באוקטובר, ניסה לקבל תשובות מפינקלמן.
פיקוד דרום ב7 באוקטובר נכשל במשימה שלו, ולמדתי שאנשים פה נלחמו במציאות קשה בגבורה, עשו את זה על פי הערכים של השריון.
הערכים שקיבלו בבית. כל ההורים האלה פה חינכו את החיילים האלה להתמודד במצבים האלה. והחזרתם לנו אותם, אני לא רוצה להגיד לך איך.
לצערי הרב לא החזרנו.
גם רפי בן שטרית, אביו של סמל ראשון שמעון אלרועי זיכרונו לברכה, לוחם באיסוף קרבי ומפעיל בלון תצפית שנהרג בקרב בנחל עוז, שאל האם האלוף ידע בזמן אמת על הכשלים.
כמה פעמים ביקרת במחנה הזה שנקרא נחל עוז?
הייתי פעם אחת במחנה הזה בחוץ.
Okay, this is an important point. So Yaron Finkelman, the head of Southern Command, had been at Nachal Oz once his entire time as head of Southern Command. And yet we're supposed to believe that under his guidance, they're aware of exactly what equipment is missing and what is needed just a day or two after the October 7th attacks. Clearly, that is preposterous. It's absolutely preposterous. And the fact that people were trying to excuse what they were saying as somehow potentially legitimate is embarrassing as the real information has begun to become even more clear. Let's take a look here. And let's look here again. It was 7 months ago. Clearly untrue, just more falsehoods. Okay, so we see here obviously a load of nonsense from the spokesperson when it comes to uh, whether or not a gear was missing. There's one little bit here I actually just want to play for those who haven't seen it yet, in which Jonathan Conricus and I discuss the gear situation in the IDF. Jonathan Conricus was the spokesperson for the Army uh, in reserves at the start of the war, helping out, and he saw quite a lot. And to him, it was pretty obvious what happened, and it's important that we are able to see what exactly transpired. He tells it pretty clearly. Very trustworthy source. If we take a look at him,
political echelon interacts with the military echelon, because there's been certain complaints or incidents in which the political class has accused Hagari of kind of crossing the line, and there obviously was conflict between some of the things that the politicians were saying and, for example, Herzi Halevi. So what's the interaction like, and how is that coordinated between the political echelon and the IDF spokesperson's unit?
Yeah, so I wasn't really part of the coordination between the Prime Minister's office and Minister of Defense during Gallant and after he was fired and replaced by Minister Katz. I was more, focused on international media, but I'll say the following. I think you address or you're putting your finger on a very important space in Israeli national security between the political and the military echelon. And I have a few things to say about it. One would be that I think we've seen different types of failure during this war. It started with the tremendous military failure that allowed Hamas to attack, murder, abduct, burn, etc., all of the horrible things that they did on October 7. I think it has continued with a leadership failure in Israel to not only define these strategic goals that were more or less defined in the beginning, but then following up on that. I, as an Israeli, not as an officer and not as a civilian, I don't know what Israel's strategy is and what we're trying to achieve. I know what we don't want. If it is Gaza, we don't want Hamas, we don't want the PA, but then what do we want and what is our strategy and what is our aim? And what I hear from many politicians is a lot of slogans and a lot of sound bites that are intended for local media and political consumption. And what really bothers me is, again, this space between the higher echelons of the military and the political echelon, where I think that we have sold ourselves short on two fronts is taking military achievements and then turning them into strategic benefits or a strategic long-term situation. In Lebanon, Israel, the IDF, achieved significant military achievements. We really delivered significant blows against Hezbollah, yet the diplomatic deal, the ceasefire that was brokered, doesn't really reflect that. And it doesn't really provide the security that Israeli civilians need or the guarantees that an October 7 attack style won't happen again. And that is on the political echelon. And what I very much regret hearing is when there's, in the military, we call it when you're shooting inside the APC. It sounds more commonplace in Hebrew. Yorim betoch hanagmash, which means when there's friendly fire and where politicians, for whatever aims or purposes, decide to use the military, senior military, as props for their political endeavors. And I've seen a lot of examples of that during this war, and I think that's very regrettable. Hagari, sure, I think he has made two mistakes during these 15 months. Once when he answered a question, and 1 out of 4 questions in one of the updates that he gave, and he answered out of line and gave an opinion, which he probably shouldn't have been sharing. And one other time when there was tension between the Ministry of Defense and the IDF.
I want to add a third one. On October 9th, 2023, when he said that there was enough equipment and that everyone had to be patient and the equipment was on the way. And he was completely wrong. And to this day, I have trouble trusting him personally because of it. But I think it leads to the question, though, about where the orders are coming from and what the audience is, right? Because it's not like and I think I heard you say this with Elon Levy, that who you're speaking to is far more complicated now in 2025 than it was 15, 20 years ago. Because I understand wanting to portray strength to our enemies, but internally, there is also an obligation about telling the truth. So that's also something that's a challenge.
Definitely. And listen, there are things, and on the 9th of October, the amount of disarray and I would say mayhem in Israel, if he said then that there's enough equipment, that was the information that he has available. You and I know that not to be the case. You definitely know, based on your extensive activity of good deeds. And again, just like Chezi Nechama thanked you, I think there's definitely room to thank you and everybody that has been working with you and donating through you to IDF soldiers. I think it's tremendous. And I am ashamed that it is needed. It's a very odd situation to be in, to be overwhelmed with gratefulness, but also to be very ashamed that we did it. But I wouldn't put this at the feet of the spokesperson. This is the logistics.
No, I think
array.
he definitely didn't. He's not going around the bases and saying, "Do they have this? Do they not have this?" Right?
No,
But the
that's not his
fact
job.
Right. The fact that they sent him out there to say that, though, caused so much damage when it came to people wanting to help, because people would say, "Listen, we trust the IDF 100%," and the spokesperson said there are no shortages. So therefore, we're going with what the spokesperson said, as opposed to you. What do you know? Right?
Yeah.
And that conflict was so challenging because you're sitting there saying, I support 99.9% of what is being said, but this little percent was just not true. And I'm curious how, that's why I was asking about the information flow, because sometimes it's hard to understand, especially to the consumer who cares a lot. I'm not talking about the enemies who are sitting there trying to pick apart and disprove all sorts of radical theories, like silly
genocide.
website. I won't. Yeah, exactly. I'm not even going to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm saying that from the inside. So, are those briefings directed towards Israelis, or are they directed toward the outside?
Well, you could see based on the language, when he speaks in Hebrew, the target audience is obviously the domestic audience, and then he switches to English and addresses international audiences and international media. But I think a very important point, he's done, I don't know, a few hundred briefings, if not more than that, where he's been the only one in Israel answering questions for many, many, many months. And I think we can cut him and many in the military some slack, because standing up and answering questions is a basic requisite that I think, or expectation that I have of politicians and elected officials. And I expect them to be there and answer tough questions, even when they don't have anything fancy to brag about, even when we're not killing Ismail Haniya in Tehran, and even when we're not killing, what's his name? Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, or Yahya Sinwar. And I expect leaders to be there in front of the camera and answer tough questions in Hebrew by Israeli media. And I haven't seen that. And then,
also, I'll give you a very, very strong backing behind the spokesperson's unit, from the perspective that, like you said, accountability. There's also, when it comes to accountability, you have brigadier generals and other people who are walking around. They have drivers, big pensions, etc. They're supposed to be responsible for logistics or whatever it might be. And they might give a sentence or two to a news outlet in print, but they don't have the courage to stand up there and actually take responsibility for some of the failures and the extra stress that's been added. And I believe that they do need to be accountable. So it's kind of like the White House. It's the White House press spokesperson, right? Hagari was sent out there with information that was clearly false. And I want to know who gave it to him. I want to know who made this claim and why did they say that? And then you can start investigating. I think that gets to that will help understand some of these things. And like you said, the lack of courage is crazy. They're very happy to go out there, like you said, and show, oh my God, look, we just got a donation. Our purchase of D9 bulldozers just showed up. Here's the photo. Here's great. Look at us. This is our strength. But when it comes to holes, which are inevitable when you don't anticipate a conflict like this, nope, nothing. We're just going to send the spokesperson out there, and he's going to have to speak for it. So yeah, I don't think that it's fair.
Yeah, and I think that, the issue, there are many things that need to be investigated in the military and in the defense establishment and in the political echelons, but the shortage of equipment, the malfunctioning equipment, and the outdated and not up to standards equipment, all of that should be part of a national board of inquiry. I mean, when I look at the situation, and I've seen, I've gotten a lot of requests and people have asked me, and I've seen the amount of equipment that has been delivered to Israeli soldiers, reservists and regular units all across the IDF, then this really should be a wake-up call. And I hope that this will be investigated, and I hope that there will be, real accountability, and that the commanders and officers, and it's not only the logistic officers, we can't, put all the blame on them. This is a command responsibility. When I was a company commander, it was in infantry, it was my responsibility to make sure that my soldiers had everything they needed in order to be fit and ready for combat. And if they didn't have it, then that was my problem. It was also the logistics officer's problem, and I would give him hell for it, but it was at the end of the day my problem as a commander. And I think what we've seen in the IDF is a serious lapse when it comes to that, and we're still waiting for the after-action reviews to be finalized and presented. That's supposed to happen. What?
There's so many things to unpack there. I'll add, I was talking to a bereaved family.
And let's also check out this one here, which has been fascinating. Just there's so many stories, and just the idea that people could even claim that they didn't need gear is preposterous.
Against time to collect donations.
Today, the Atlanta Israel Coalition pushing out a plea for help for soldiers in Israel. Atlanta News First Yasmina Alston has their message.
It's been long days and nights for Cheryl Dorchinsky, who says she was finally able to sit and take a breath on Monday to tell us about some of the most recent work. Dorchinsky is with the Atlanta Israel Coalition, an organization that has been going nonstop since the Israel-Hamas war began.
I think if I said that we were okay, that would absolutely be a lie. I would encourage people to check on their friends. You know, you can't take away the pain, but you definitely can just show you care.
And the Atlanta Israel Coalition is working hard. They've compiled a list of essential items that IDF soldiers currently require. Dorchinsky says a truck will collect the donations in Atlanta on Thursday before going to New York City and then to Israel into the hands of the Israel Defense Forces.
Gloves to watches, backpacks, you know, just basic essentials. Because when you call all the reservists, it's hard to get everything for everyone. Some of this equipment is a little older, and you know, these soldiers, they need the support, they need the help.
The list goes on and even includes knee pads in green, black, or brown, headlamps, and LED flashlights with batteries. Dorchinsky says the comprehensive list can be found on the coalition's website, which is also...
I think we get the point. And let's also, I'm just going to turn things over here quickly to a previous podcast I ran with a reservist who very clearly states what's going on in terms of how much donations are truly needed. Mail Time Podcast, talking about October 7th, what happened on October 7th, the IDF, everything afterwards, how Israel and the Jewish people look in the aftermath of that horrendous day. And I'm joined here with an anonymous soldier. I'm not going to say his unit so he can speak more openly and freely. Blurred his face, or really blurred the entire screen. But I appreciate what you're doing. I know the entire Jewish people in Israel appreciate what you're doing. And thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you've been doing since October 7th? Again, not mentioning your specific unit or every location that you've ever been in, but what have you been doing in general?
So I was actually outside of the country when it started. Prior to the war starting, I was working as an EMT in an ambulance service in the States. What happened on the 7th of October happened, and my captain asked me to return. My teammates at the time were already down just outside of the scene, Gaza, and we're trying to get inside, we're trying to get involved and start helping out, start the process of doing their role. Our job in the military is essentially to do a lot of medevac behind enemy lines, or essentially be right up inside of the action. If someone gets hit, we're going to be the guys going in to pull them out. We're working with Shesha Shesha, with a few other units. There's several other units as well that fill the same role. They're usually a bit more unit specific, which means that every different larger force is going to have a similar type unit attached to them. We have the misfortune and the honor of being attached to the entire commander force. So we're kind of tossed around to a lot of different units. We're constantly being involved in a lot of different missions that should sort of be not outside of our scope of ability, but not our job, because there should be other units that should do the same thing. But unfortunately, due to the level of experience we have, we're relied on very heavily. Our team has done now, I think, about 350 plus days in service. We've been inside of every part of Gaza. We've now been inside of Lebanon since the beginning of the entry. There was this large evil over the Goes where they mentioned our unit by name. We were the first ones in to take out the wounded. It's been an interesting time. It's been pretty intense.
So you show up back from the States or from outside of Israel, and it's October 8th, October 9th, October 10th, somewhere in that range. What did your equipment look like?
It was about, our equipment was really, honestly, not good. Part of my job returning to the team was to source and find equipment.
Is that
immediately
that's
after
because
the
you spoke
situation
English,
happened.
right? So therefore, if you speak English, you become like the procurement officer, essentially.
That is essentially the case. Any group of guys that have like one Kyle Boded or Le Hadash, anyone who's an English-speaking guy is going to become the warrant officer, the guy who has to run around, make connections, and start sourcing equipment, even if they have no experience doing so or don't even really understand what equipment it is that they're looking for.
And just because you speak English doesn't mean that you know people that want to donate equipment, right? That's the other thing that it's not funny, but so many times they'll just say, "Okay, you're American or you're not."
Yes,
you're born Israeli, so therefore you must know someone who's rich and go talk to them.
precisely. There's two assumptions that because you're American, you're probably more well off and can afford to find stuff for the team, or that you know people who are well off and that they can do so. Neither are really correct. A lot of people come here from different communities. Not everyone's the same. There are maybe a few people who can provide those connections, but there are a lot of us who can't. I was very lucky that I was put in touch with a few people who were able to give us some things, not really everything we needed. And I was very fortunate to have a lot of experience with equipment already, so I knew what to look for, but it didn't really provide answers in terms of being able to afford it or actually getting our hands on it. I'm sorry, there's just a bit of rain out here. I'm just going to move.
And what percent of the equipment you have now do you think has been donated, aside from your gun?
Besides for the gun, everything that I have now is pretty much either stuff that I purchased with my own money, either prior to the war happening or during the duration of the war after seeing how many days we were in and how long and what likelihood we were of continuing to work for long hours. The rest of it's all been pieced together, donated. It took a while, and a lot of it at this point has fallen apart because, unfortunately, pretty much everything is a use case item. It's going to get wear and tear. It's going to get worn out, and you're going to have to
look. It makes sense. It's the same way if you have to get a car serviced, you have to ensure that if you use, I'm usually in the t-shirt printing space. If you wash a t-shirt 500 times, decent chance that the print is going to be washed out, right? So naturally, if you use something quite often, there's going to be wear and tear. So it's the
absolutely
same way that you have to get your shoes shined if you're wearing leather shoes. That makes a lot of sense. Has there been any sort of plan that's been presented to your unit from the Army or from the Ministry of Defense with how they're going to replace or help fix any of your equipment?
None that I'm aware of.
Have they come around trying to give you proper helmets and plates and things like that?
No, not really. The options that were presented at the beginning of the war are still the options that we have. Now, not all of them are terrible. Some of them are simply outdated, or they're not compatible with what we're trying to use that we've already procured ourselves, which is a bit high quality. Like we have some guys have selective hearing protection, which essentially means that because they're using the large, heavy machine guns, we don't want them to completely lose their hearing and end up with tinnitus for life. So they have these essentially over-ear protective hearing. But that would only work with a high-cut helmet, the larger bucket helmets that the IDF issues are not compatible or they won't fit around them. So
Right, but
they simply can't use
you
them.
were issued helmets from the 70s and 80s, or you were issued helmets, the Shankar helmet that's newer?
Actually, a combination. It really depended on when you showed up and what was left. It's sort of a first come, first serve. There are not enough items for everyone. And there's a combination of factors for why that is. Part of that is because when you're in a reserve unit, you're going to get the leftovers or the hand-me-downs from whatever Sadia is not currently using. The current ground forces are going to be number one customer. They're going to get it first. Even if you are working with them on a constant basis and would really need the exact same level of equipment or the same standard of gear, you're not going to get it.
And I'm sure,
Especially if you're a smaller.
I want to jump in there for 1 second. I'm sure you guys have commented on that to the powers that be about it. So what do they say when you tell them, listen, my blood is as red as the Sadir soldiers. How come we don't have proper equipment? What's the response there?
It's usually a budgetary issue. It's a small group of guys. We're not going to reach the same ears or necessarily gain the same attention that a much larger, more famous unit is going to receive. A lot of what happened at the beginning of the war was also a cost per quantity issue. Many people wanted to donate, and you don't want to just give money, you want to give gear because it seems like a more direct way to make sure you're reaching the individual soldier, which I do agree with. I think a lot of donations ultimately are not reaching the ground forces, and that's part of the problem. But what happened was that a lot of people bought sub-quality or lesser than quality goods in order to supply as many people as possible, and that kind of stuff is going to wear out even quicker than just a regular average vest. So that also created a situation where the customs here in Israel did not want to allow more people to continue shipping questionable items from out of the states, from the states to here, because you were getting things that were not really up to standard, and people were getting hurt or injured in Gaza in combat due to the deficiencies of the equipment.
Well, a few things there. One, there's a few different things there. One is being hurt or injured due to deficiencies in equipment. I've definitely heard that from IDF issued gear. Have you heard that from donated gear? Because I've yet to come across a case where someone was given something and they got injured because they had poor equipment, that better equipment that they had from the IDF would have helped them. That's not to say that people haven't been injured, and they would have been injured anyway, regardless, right? If you have a proper vest and a proper plate and someone shoots you with a 50 caliber rifle,
you're gone.
Nothing that's
going
to stop that.
There's nothing that would have stopped that. I agree. This is something.
Across that, because the only reason I say that is because the Misrad B'Tachon put out a number of. They obviously planted a few stories that were demonstrably false, saying that they tested all this stuff and it didn't work. But I have no evidence that it really, truly didn't work. That's what I'm asking.
So I do have a little bit of familiarity with NIJ kind of specifications, what's supposed to be absorbed by what. I'm not a maven by any regard. I'm certainly not an expert, and I'm not going to claim to be one because I'm not. I simply have a slightly larger breadth of knowledge because I was raised in the States and got to do these things on my own time and on my own dollar. And when you're doing that in the States, you have more things that you can try and test.
Right.
We did take some of the donated ceramic plates, and while we were on the range, we did shoot them because I insisted that even if we were only receiving 8 plates, we had to test at least one that we knew that the 7 other plates would be up to snuff.
Right.
And some of the plates held up good, and there were a few that weren't really that great. I don't know where these donations came from. These weren't things that I personally sourced, so I have less of a say in what was coming in. But there were some stories in the beginning of the war of some people getting donations of ceramic plates that were claiming to be NIJ level 4, but were not in reality level 4, and broke upon first impact.
I'll say this.
So
I'll say this quickly, that anytime you essentially have to open up procurement and sourcing to civilians, unfortunately, poor things might happen because, again, Bubby and Sadie shouldn't be the ones handling purchasing their kids.
Oh, I could not agree more. We're 100% on the same page.
It's just, I'm going to point it out for the viewers, just that.
Right.
This is something that inevitably will happen if you don't have proper supply chain, which is why when we started Unit 11741, we're always insisting on making sure that it's proper equipment and that we're not just throwing, we're not trying to just save $5 and buy something a little bit cheaper, because it really has to be quality. And the fear we had was that, God forbid, we would ever give someone something that didn't work and failed. And we took that very, very seriously. And we still take that very seriously till today. And it was really weird to me seeing how people were obsessing over dollar amounts instead of safety in some cases. And the quote unquote cutting corners didn't make sense. And I think I also just have to point out that there were tons of ceramic plates that the IDF and the Ministry of Bitakon gave out that were not up to speed and were not quality. So when we talk about potentially receiving donations that are not quality, there are many soldiers that receive gear from the IDF that wasn't quality, and it's a big problem. And it really shouldn't have. It should have just been fixed relatively easily if there was just honesty from the beginning. But because there was so much, so many lies, it created this environment where people didn't even know what to trust, what not to trust. And it still persists till today in some ways, because I'll still have a soldier come to me and say, I have a helmet from 1979 from the IDF, but it's on the IDF approved list, but the helmet you're offering me might not be on the list. And I said, so what is the value of this list? Just the fact that the IDF published it? Is there value? Have they tested that helmet? Can they provide a test on a helmet from 1979? I've never seen a helmet from 1979 that was tested in 2024 and passed the test. So the fact that they give it to soldiers is highly disturbing. That's my interlude there, but I don't want to distract from your story.
So I think I have two comments. One, the first being, I agree. It's because of organizations that you're working in, like yourself, that we actually now have reliable equipment. And it's because of people who are donating to your organization and the fact that you guys are actually doing good work, but this is no longer an issue. This was more of something that we saw in the first few months. And then because of the change in the way that customs was interacting with outside buyers and outside suppliers, it was essentially cut off. So whatever quality equipment was being sourced wasn't coming in the same way. It did prevent some of the lesser quality things from arriving. And I think what happened there was that there were a lot of people who meant really well, but essentially have no experience in the tactical market. And when you don't know what you're looking for, it's a lot harder to make sure that's what arrives to the soldiers' hands. And they wanted to supply as many people as possible, which I also personally understand. But when you're in a time crunch and you're hearing things like the IDF is sending in forces and literally massing on the border in Gaza, and many of these guys don't have plates, well, then I imagine you're going to buy as many of whatever you can find and send them as fast as possible. And that's probably where some of these issues happened. I think it was more of a lack of information rather than a deliberate or intentive wish to not do well. I think it was a sort of something that was forced by the lachats, by the stress of the whole war. Regarding the IDF and what's going on with that, it is very confusing. I don't think it really makes sense. There were things that also happened. I don't want to get conspiratorial, but prior to the Shvili October, for the last several years, we've been selling large amounts of the equipment we had to Ukraine because of pressure from the States. I'm not really sure why we did that. And it created a
I also just want to add, some of it was, I think, Hasbara related, meaning it looks good to be able to help other countries. And I think that was partly the motivation as well. If I'm going to give them cut slack on anything.
Right. I think I understand why that also happened. It's important also. There's a lot of Ukrainian Jewish people, and there are many people from the IDF who have family in Ukraine who return there to fight. I can understand the intention. It simply, at the end of the day, did create a situation where people were running to their bases to sign on equipment that just wasn't there. And it's also very true that much of the stuff we have in stock is decades old. All the plates are these enormous turtle shell models that make it really hard to turn around. If you're a vehicle mounted force, forget about it, because they add like 2 inches of width around your entire frame in both directions. It makes it very hard to be mobile, turn around, and a lot of people here are sort of just like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But their understanding of equipment is coming from the IDF in the first place. They've not really had the opportunity to see how other militaries function, what other kinds of equipment are out there, and what you don't know about, you can't improve upon. So they're essentially just going along with whatever they can receive because it's all they have. And many of them don't have the money themselves to go and buy better stuff.
Sorry, you were saying there that people don't have the money, and it's kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's completely true. And also, I think there's the education. It's not when you join the army.
Right.
From what I understand, you join the army and you are told how to take care of your gun, how to maintenance your weapon, but you're not sitting there saying, "Hey guys, make sure about your ceramic plates. This is the proper way. This is the improper way, and make sure your helmet is
Right.
not older than 10 years old." Does that happen?
That does happen. There's a lot of smaller details that just get lost in between the chairs, I guess. Where when I'm out there training other teams, whether it's at Midtown Adam or IMI, I try to stress about wearing the equipment properly. So many times you see guys who've been issued gear and it's sitting lopsided, or it's sitting too low on the chest and it's leaving their heart or their subclavian artery is completely exposed, or you look at the back plate, it's not even covering their torso completely. The helmet's canted, the helmet's leaning back, which is leaving the forehead exposed. It's little details like this, but it's a conscripted force, and many times you'll run into guys who are here because they have to be and not because they want to be. And part of changing that dynamic and that Ratzon Mitgaes is changing the culture and actually putting in money and effort into the training and the equipment that these people receive so that they feel like they can fulfill the role that society needs them to fulfill. So many times I've met soldiers who, when they're looking at my team's, like whatever few things I've managed to get for the team, they're like, "Oh my gosh, we could really use this. That looks amazing." And you realize a lot of the motivation to perform comes from feeling like you can fulfill the task. And if you're being given operations to perform at night, but only 6 or 8 of your 40 or 50 man team have night vision, well, you're not going to really feel that capable, and you're not completely up to the task. And if your guys are running night vision, you can't be using white light at the same time because it's going to blind them or destroy their unit. Like the device they're using will simply be burnt out and cease to work because it's being overloaded with too much light.
I also think that if the soldiers feel that the army's taking them seriously, then they'll take their work seriously. It's a shorter way of saying what you were saying, and it's.
I agree.
I was always laughing when they'd say, "Oh, people that are over enemy lines will receive better gear," and I said, "So, if you're in Yudav Shamron and you're in a pillbox doing work, you don't deserve to have proper gear at that point. It's just kind of optional, and in practice, that's true." And that's problematic, and it needs to change. And it's one of these things that, as I was getting started in this, it really didn't make sense to me, because I just couldn't understand why the safety of the soldiers wasn't a huge priority. And
right,
it's a cultural thing from the top down. If the bosses don't care about you, then you don't feel that you matter. And the whole thing where they would make fun of soldiers saying you just want to look good for Instagram and you want to look like a commando. I have a question. If you're Shin Gimel on an army base that holds important assets for the Air Force or the Army, why shouldn't you have proper equipment if you, God forbid, have 3 Palestinian terrorists who want to make a problem at the gate? Like, why is that a case where you just say, okay, you don't need equipment? It truly does not make sense to me. I can't understand it.
I agree. I think this also
just the culture of telling people that you are essentially like Dorot iPhone, you're the iPhone generation, you're weak, or it also really needs to change, because if someone wants to seek out a way to make their personal safety increased, it should be supported. It shouldn't be laughed at.
I agree completely. I think also the generation of iPhone are the ones who are going to be more involved in cybersecurity. And part of what happened here on the 7th of October was also a cyber attack. It's important to have the units that are connected to Modin that are involved with cyber warfare. And I think that oftentimes the laughing at the new generation just comes from not understanding them or not really knowing how to reach the whole. And that's something that also has to change. I think the new recruits that I've met so far, these new teams, have this huge rason. They really want to do as best they can. And they need people to believe in them, give them the encouragement, and push them forward. Part of being a productive military structure is having the guys with experience actually provide support and the right motivation to the newer guys, and not just push them down or say, in my day it was X, Y, and Z, or the Army is just softer now, because that doesn't really change anything. It just creates this environment of them feeling like they're not good enough. And then those will eventually just lead to self-doubt or khosel bitachon b'shetach, which is something no one really needs. And part of the issue with training for all these different units is also the connection directly to gear, because gear is a direct correlation to your understanding of what you need to be doing in the shetach. And if you need to stop someone who's running at you from 100 meters, 50 meters, or 25 meters, whichever, regardless, a Kavenet Balzel is not going to be as fast as a Red Dot. So why do so many guys still get issued M16s with carry handles and no projected sighting system, no Red Dot? Why do so many of our Kalaim still have ACOGs when other units and other forces and different militaries are using LPVOs and 1-to-8 magnification? Tzahal has an issue with being just 2 or 3 dilugim achora. And I think it's time, this last 12 months has really been a great sefer lakachim on why we need to להתקדם and להיכנס למציאות. Kind of realize that we're in the 2024 and we need to put more money into the ground forces. A large amount of our budget is put into artillery and to the Air Force. Understandably, air superiority is a huge part of our ability to flex on the rest of these other countries and stop them from entering the way that they would want to. There's plenty of examples historically for that. I don't think that's even something in question. But we could maybe buy just one less F-35 per year and put that money towards all the Filnikim and then take the equipment that they have, which is maybe 5 years out of date, and then give that to Miluim, and that'll solve maybe 70 to 80% of the problem. We're not saying it has to happen overnight, and we're not expecting everyone to get an IOTech and an MCX from Sig Sauer with a Mashtikol or an Imam or a suppressor, however you like to call it at home. But it's time for everyone to get a Red Dot, maybe. And perhaps maybe also hearing protection, electronic hearing protection, because everyone's going to have tinnitus and hearing
and proper it's pretty clear here about some of the issues that are being faced. If you're tuning in and you want to have any questions, thoughts, drop a like or a comment, and I'd be happy to respond. I will also continue now just by putting on a different episode so you can actually get a different sense of exactly what we're dealing with. And we have been dealing with for the past now almost 17 months. My name is Daniel Mail. I started Unit 11741 after October 7th to help with Israeli soldiers with the critical need for life and death equipment that's missing on the front lines. Normally, there's a guest and we're having a discussion about issues pertaining to Israel and the Jewish world. But today I want to address an article that just came out in Yisrael Hayom from Hanan Greenwald. Okay, so I'm going to have the English translation of this, as this is an English language podcast. And it says, despite equipment shortages, the IDF has banned the acceptance of donations. Reservist fighters received outdated and non-standard equipment from the Army. Officers present at the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee responded that it would take time to address the gaps, between 6 months to a year. The IDF stated that all military units are supplied with equipment that meets standards and in quantities that match the structure and organization of ground units for combat. Now, it's important to note that the IDF does not have a procedure right now that's widely implemented in which existing equipment is actually tested. So if someone's given a helmet and it's from 1980, there's not a procedure in which the procurement or logistics of the IDF are going around and actually testing the helmets. Same thing goes for plates. Now, there might be a visual check occasionally, but there is no team that's going around from base to base and actually destroying broken equipment. It's actually a point of pride that in training, soldiers are using Tziyud Bach training equipment that's old, so that it will kind of build toughness, but that's not meant for combat. And what happened on October 7th, or after October 7th, is that there was a lack of necessary equipment, and this stuff was put into use. So you had unsafe equipment openly being used on multiple fronts, and tens of millions of dollars of donations came in to help fill the gap. That doesn't fix the problem that this gap exists, and there's no way to actually test it. The IDF and our sources there have shown no indication that there's actually a helmet testing facility in the IDF. So I'm not really sure how the spokesperson's unit and how the members of the military could say that it meets the standards and quantities if they don't actually have a way to test the standard. So it continues. In a recent closed discussion at the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, IDF representatives were asked about the equipment situation for reservists. A year after the war began, Knesset members sought to understand the status and whether there were gaps. The officers responded that it would take time to close these gaps, between 6 months to a year. So we're sitting here in October 2024 and being told that allegedly the gaps will be filled between 6 months to a year. So there's a three-front war with physical soldiers on the ground: Gaza, Lebanon, Judea, and Samaria. And the families of these soldiers and these soldiers are supposed to say, okay, I'm going to wait 6 months to a year for proper equipment to come, allegedly. Mind you that on October 9th, Daniel Hagari, spokesperson of the IDF, said that all of the equipment was set and there was no need for donations. If you want to help with something like barbecues or something like that, that it would be nice, but it's not necessary. So the credibility is not there for the IDF when they speak about these things, yet they're talking as if you shouldn't worry because in 6 months to a year, allegedly, the equipment will show up. What does that mean for soldiers on October 9th? That means that there are tens of thousands of soldiers that are not given the proper equipment from the Army, from the proper channels, and they are put in unnecessary risk. And the Army is admitting this. In the months following October 7th, the phenomenon of donations was massive. Diaspora communities contributed money and equipment, which went directly to reservists who received outdated and inadequate gear from the IDF. I want to pause for a second. It also is a major problem in Sadir units. Sadir units are regular conscription. They might have better equipment because the Army does have some very limited numbers, but it does not explain away the fact that there's a significant portion of the gear in the IDF that is outdated. I can tell you, we have given minimum $6 million worth of equipment just for Sadir units. Helmets, vests, plates, and other items that are life and death. And the Army tried to hide behind the excuse saying that there were so many reservists that showed up that they couldn't handle the volume. This is a misnomer because they couldn't handle the volume of Sadir soldiers that needed to be in combat. And they were missing immense numbers of things. just last week, for an elite unit, we replaced, Unit 11741 replaced ceramic plates from 2006 for regular conscription Sadir soldiers. So it's just very important that when these kinds of lies are put out there, that we counter them and say, this is just not the case. So the article continues. A few months ago, the IDF decided to halt this flow and prohibited the acceptance of donations, partly due to non-standard and sometimes dangerous equipment that reaches the fighters. The approach led by Ground Forces Commander Major General Tamir Idai is that the Army must provide the necessary equipment. Now, again, this is highly misleading. They speak in generalities and say that the non-standard and sometimes dangerous equipment reach the fighters. Can they provide actual examples of this equipment reaching the fighters and posing a threat to someone's life? Now, Unit 11741 has actually pulled unsafe donations off of fighters and replaced them with safe equipment. So there were some groups and some individuals who had no idea what they're doing and providing quote unquote bad donations. That absolutely happened. 100%. But that's like saying that someone got in a car accident and therefore all cars are banned from the street. There are plenty of good donations, people that were checking and making sure that they meet the ballistic standard. The IDF doesn't actually check their older equipment to see if it meets the ballistic standard. So they're holding donations to a higher standard than what the IDF actually issues to the soldiers. And this is a major, major problem. So instead of providing specific examples, they speak generally and say that there's dangerous equipment that was donated. Well, Unit 11741 knows of dozens of soldiers that were either killed or injured in bad equipment during this war, and the bad equipment was provided by the IDF. There's also dozens of units that needed to get basic medical supplies donated. It was not provided by the Army. So there's no consistent standard, and the Army is just throwing things against the wall saying that donations are bad. Now, Unit 11741 can agree donations are bad. It's an absolute moral stain on the state of Israel and on the good name of the IDF. Donations should not be necessary. Unfortunately, this is the position that the IDF has created. So this donation phenomenon is in response to the behavior and the procurement of the IDF. So if they want to clean it up, absolutely. But the question is, are they actually working quickly to clean it up? Telling our sons, daughters, cousins, brothers-in-law, grandsons, husbands, fathers that they have to wait 6 months to a year to get proper equipment, but go on foot into Lebanon, that's not a morally acceptable answer. So we continue. Right now, we're going to take a quick break and have a IDF mega mix from Gaza brought to you by Unit 11741.
שלוש, שתיים, אחד. וואו! וואו! ילדים! וואו! היה שווה לחכות. שתיים, אחד.
אנחנו גדחן 271 במסר לחמאס. למרות ה-7 באוקטובר, למרות עשרות ימי לחימה ברצועה, אנחנו מוכנים לדבר על סולחה, על חשיבה מחדש, בנייה מחדש, שיקום הרצועה.
תחנות ארנולד מנהרי. יש לי את הזכות להקדיש את הפיצוץ הבא לצוות מיר 19 פלחן צנחנים היקרים, לרפואת כל הפצועים ולזכרם של חיילינו שנפלו בקרב, אליסף שושן ואוהד אשור שמלווים אותנו לעד. פסל שלי בעוד 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5,
4, 3, 2, 1. על הפחד!
What the fuck, יא חביבי, יא חביבי, יו, שנדדה מגיתך, יו, יא ורדי, איזה פיצוץ. וואי וואי וואי, זה מוקדש לכל החברים שלי. וואו, זה היה עוצמתי. וואו.
What did your equipment look like?
It was about, our equipment was really, honestly not good. Part of my job returning to the team.
And just one more for good measure here that will allow us to have some fun here and keep it a little bit light.
מחבלים ואין לנו על מי להישאר, אלא אבינו, אבינו שבשמיים. ישראל, ישראל תפתח בהשם, ישראל לנו מגיננו, ישראל, ישראל תפתח בהשם.
The big question is what the gap is. Senior IDF officials believe that the gaps are not significant and it is mainly concerns a culture that has developed among reservist forces which encourages the acceptance of donations. On the other hand, testimonies from reservists raise questions about the equipment they receive and its quality, especially in comparison to regular soldiers. Well, look, are there soldiers, Sadir, regular service, and reservist Miluim that ask for crazy things? Flat screen televisions, PlayStations? Absolutely. And you know what people tell them, by and large? Take a hike. I'm sorry, but you're in the army and we're still missing critical equipment. So there are soldiers that ask for crazy things. That said, these soldiers are asking for basic life-saving equipment to protect their eyes, to protect their hearing, to protect their heart, to protect their head. And it's absolutely insulting to level these allegations against these soldiers. They're asking for basic life-saving equipment. And Tamir Yadai and the leadership of the IDF did not act quickly enough to figure this out. And they still haven't figured it out. And yet they throw this dirt on the brave soldiers who are on the front lines. One who frequently addresses this issue and does not hide his sharp criticism is Knesset member Moshe Tur Paz in Yesh Atid. He is a reserve lieutenant colonel and spent a significant portion of the initial months of the war in uniform. As the deputy speaker of the Knesset, a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and a reservist officer, he receives numerous inquiries from the soldiers and commanders reporting significant gaps. Last week, he toured the Gaza border in the north and again heard these gaps. He describes the IDF's claims that the gaps are small as, quote, disconnected, and in more colorful language says, quote, they're living in a movie. This is absolutely true. Just yesterday, Unit 11741 replaced a helmet from 1980. This is before the First Lebanon War, which occurred in 1982. So you had a helmet that is over 40 years old, still being in use on a soldier being sent into a dangerous combat area. And the other point, which is not small, if you're an IDF soldier in uniform anywhere in Israel, it's important you have proper equipment because you have a target on your back walking around in that green uniform. There are terrorists, as we saw in Jaffa last week. It's important that soldiers are given proper equipment. There can't be a standard. So if there's literally a grenade flying at your face, then you get a proper helmet and vest.